I didn't see it coming at all. I mean, how could I? There I was, sitting at the dinner table, savoring the quiet after a long day, when my 42-year-old wife, Emily, stares me straight in the eye and says she's going out for dinner with a colleague. Sure, on the surface, dinner with a colleague doesn't sound like a big deal, right? But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some casual meal between friends. It was a date. A full-blown, no-holds-barred date with some guy she works with. And she just tossed it out there like it meant nothing. Let me rewind a bit. Emily and I tied the knot when she was 22. Young, clueless, and pregnant. Neither of us knew what we were really doing, but we jumped into it anyway, like so many young couples do. It's funny looking back now, people in their 20s today seem so much more together than we ever were. But at the time, getting married felt right. And, to be honest, the early years weren't all bad. There were good times, especially in the beginning. After we got married, I started focusing on investments. Numbers always came naturally to me, so I built a business around that skill and turned it into something successful. We didn't just get by, we thrived. I gave Emily and our family a life that a lot of people would dream of. But let me tell you, no amount of money can patch up what was coming next. We had a son, our pride and joy, but he was born sick, really sick. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than watching your own child suffer. Knowing that no matter how much money you have, no matter how many doctors or treatments you throw at it, you can't fix it. That kind of helplessness sticks with you, haunts you. Our son passed away after a long battle with his illness. And Emily, she was never the same after that. She withdrew completely. I understand grief does that to people, but she didn't just grieve. She shut me out entirely. We were still married on paper, but emotionally, physically, we were like two strangers living under the same roof. I tried everything to bring her back, therapy, vacations, time off work, you name it, I tried it. Nothing worked. For years, she was like a ghost in the house, unreachable. It took countless sessions with psychologists just to get her to open up a little. Things got marginally better after a while, but not by much. She was a different person, and I wasn't sure she'd ever be the same again. Fast forward to that night at the dinner table. That's when she drops the bomb. She's going out with this guy from work, and she had the audacity to act like it was no big deal. He's just a friend, she said. He's been really supportive, and I just need someone to talk to. Yeah, okay. I'm not an idiot. This wasn't about talking. Her energy had been up, her mood better, all thanks to this guy apparently. In that moment, I didn't know how to respond. My mind just went blank. How do you react when your wife casually tells you she's going on a date with another man? I didn't want to blow up, didn't want to start a fight, so I just got up and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't even take my keys or my phone, just walked. She ran after me, and I'll never forget the panic in her voice. Like she knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't undo. Wait, she yelled, her footsteps rushing behind me. It's not what you think. Just listen to me. But I didn't want to hear it. What could she possibly say to make this okay? That it wasn't betrayal? That it was somehow normal for her to go on dates with other men? She pleaded with me to understand, insisting it wasn't cheating. She kept saying he was just a colleague and that I was blowing this out of proportion. And then she hit me with the line that stung the most. He's made me feel alive again. You have no idea how much I've needed this. Needed what, exactly? A dinner? A man who wasn't me? I was too furious to respond, but one thing was clear as day. If I told her not to go, she'd still go. I know Emily. She's the kind of woman who always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. The problem is she never stops to think about how high the price might be. I knew I had to figure out my next move. There was no way I was just going to let this slide. I've tolerated a lot from her over the years, but this was a line she had crossed, and I couldn't ignore it. I needed proof, cold, hard evidence of what she was really up to. So, I reached out to a friend of mine who knows people. The kind of people who can dig into someone's life and uncover everything. I told him what was going on, and he connected me with a private investigator. I wanted it all. Who this guy was, how he lived, what his intentions were. I needed to know where they went, what they did, and yeah, I wanted photos. I wanted to see them together, right in front of my face. Because deep down, I already knew this was more than just dinner. I could feel it in my gut. Something wasn't right. And I wasn't going to just sit back and let my life unravel without knowing exactly what was happening behind my back. And that's where I left things. The PI was on the case, and I was waiting to find out who this guy was, what my wife was really doing, and how I was going to handle it. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just confront her right there and then? Well, I've learned over the years that sometimes you need to be patient. Let the truth reveal itself. And when it does, you hit back hard. But for now, I had no choice but to wait. And trust me, this is where things really started to go downhill. The detective wasted no time at all. Just a few days after I gave him the go-ahead, he came back with the first bit of information on this guy, David. Yeah, David. It's always some ordinary guy with a name as dull as dishwater, right? But don't let that fool you. David wasn't some nobody. The guy had a family, 2 kids, a wife, and a solid job. He lived in one of those big suburban houses, a McMansion with the white picket fence, probably even had a dog running around the yard. The whole perfect life package. But you know what they say? People like David are usually hiding something under all that shiny surface. And I was going to figure out exactly what that was. The detective didn't just give me the basics either. He went all in. I got the full rundown. His home address, where his kids went to school, what his wife did for a living, even the make and model of his car. It was like I had a dossier in front of me, detailing every aspect of this guy's life. The same guy who Emily thought was worth dressing up and stepping out with. I sat there, staring at his photo. He looked harmless enough, like any middle-aged dude more interested in watching football than sneaking around with someone else's wife. But I wasn't buying it. Looks can be deceiving, and I wasn't taking any chances. I'm not an idiot. I knew Emily wasn't telling me the whole story, and I wasn't going to just sit there waiting for her to suddenly get honest. So I started putting my own plan in motion. When you've got the kind of resources I do, you can make things happen. Big things. And I didn't care how much it cost. This wasn't just about money. It was about my pride. It was about getting to the truth and yet getting my revenge. My next step? It required the right kind of person. And I knew exactly who to reach out to. I called up an old buddy of mine. Let's call him John. He had connections in the right places, if you catch my drift. John owed me a couple of favors from back in the day, and when I explained what was going on, he didn't hesitate. Within hours, he had someone lined up for me. This girl. Well, she was exactly what I needed. She was young, maybe 27 or 28 tops. Blonde, legs for days, and a face that could make any guy do a double take. The kind of woman who could make a man like David forget all about his tidy little suburban life. John showed me her picture, and I didn't even need to think twice. I gave the green light immediately. She was perfect for the job. And yeah, I'm sure you've got an idea of what kind of work she does, but I'm not going to lay it all out here. This is Reddit, after all. Let's just say she was very good at what she did and leave it at that. With her in play, my plan was really starting to take shape. But I wasn't about to stop with just setting David up. No, I wanted to cover all my bases. So I also hired someone to tail him. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. I wanted to know what David was doing when he wasn't with her. How he spent his time, who else he might be seeing. I needed the full picture, not just a glimpse of a single dinner date. The private investigator was still gathering intel, and the girl was prepped and ready to make her move. I felt confident everything was lining up perfectly. Guys like David? They always screw up eventually. And when he did, I'd be right there with all the evidence I needed to blow this wide open. But just when I thought everything was under control, Emily threw a wrench into the whole thing. It was the day before her supposed date with David, and we were sitting in the kitchen. I was playing it cool, acting like I wasn't orchestrating her entire downfall behind the scenes. She looks up from her phone and drops a bombshell. I've been thinking, I'm not going to meet David tomorrow after all. For a split second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. She wasn't going? After everything I had put into this? After setting the perfect trap to catch her and David together? What the hell was happening? I kept my cool, though. Oh, I said, pretending like I didn't care one way or the other. Why not? She hesitated, then said, "I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, I'm going to grab dinner with a friend. We're trying out that new place downtown." I looked at her, my mind racing. Something about this didn't sit right with me. Maybe she'd had second thoughts about David. Maybe she realized how messed up it was to go through with it. But the way she said it, I couldn't shake the feeling there was more to the story. And when she mentioned this friend, I couldn't help but wonder if it was still David or someone else entirely. But I knew better than to push. If I showed too much interest, she'd get suspicious. So I just nodded and acted like I was fine with it. Deep down, though, there was no way I was letting this slide. The plan was still on. I wasn't about to call off the private investigator or the girl just because Emily suddenly had a change of heart. Whatever was going on, whether it was David or someone else, I was going to find out. She could twist the story however she wanted, but at this point, I was too invested to back down. So there I was playing it cool on the surface, while behind the scenes, I was pulling every string I could. Believe me, one way or another, Emily was going to mess up. And when she did, I'd be right there, ready to catch her in the act. Turns out my gut feeling had been spot on. Despite what Emily said at the kitchen table, she was still planning to go out with David. It didn't matter what excuses she'd fed me. Her actions were telling a different story. The detective confirmed it for me with his latest update. She had reserved a table for two at this fancy restaurant, the kind we used to visit back when things were good. But that wasn't even the worst part. She also booked a hotel room. And not just any room, but one that cost $400 a night. You don't rent that kind of room just to have a friendly chat. I knew exactly what was going down. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Dinner, a few drinks, and then a night at that overpriced hotel with David. The more I thought about it, the more my blood started to boil. But I knew I had to stay sharp. This wasn't the time to lose my head. I had to be smart about this. First things first, I had one of the detectives stationed outside David's house. I needed to know if David's wife was going to be home while my wife was off cheating with him. It was all part of the plan, and everything needed to go off without a hitch. My goal wasn't just to catch Emily and David in the act. No, I wanted to blow David's life apart too. And then we waited. That's the part no one tells you about. How much waiting is involved. Knowing exactly what's about to happen, but having to sit tight, hands tied, until the perfect moment to strike. Then the first bit of evidence came in, a photo. Emily and David, sitting together at the restaurant, looking all comfortable, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But that wasn't what really set me off. No, the second photo was the real kicker. It was of them kissing right there in the restaurant. Bold as brass, like they didn't have a care in the world, like what they were doing was completely normal. I wanted to lose it. I wanted to tear something apart right there. And then, but I had to keep my head in the game. This was just the beginning. I knew they weren't going to stop at the restaurant. The hotel room was waiting, and I had no doubt they'd be heading there next. But before they got that far, I had one more card to play. I called up the detective who was parked outside David's house. "Is his wife home?" I asked. "Yes, she's home," he confirmed. Perfect. That was all I needed. I sent him the picture of David and Emily kissing, along with very specific instructions on what to do next. I can still remember the rush of satisfaction I felt, knowing what was about to unfold. The detective went up and knocked on David's front door. His wife answered, probably expecting some kind of routine inquiry, but what she got was far from that. The detective didn't waste any time. He asked her if she knew where David was. Naturally, she didn't. David had probably told her he'd be working late. Same old story, I bet, every time he snuck out behind her back. When the detective asked again, her nerves started to show. I could almost picture the panic setting in, like she was starting to wonder if something had happened to him. The detective calmed her down. "No, he's fine," he said, "but you might want to take a look at this." He handed her the photo of David and Emily locked in that kiss. I can only imagine the look on her face as she realized what she was looking at. Her world probably started to unravel right there, standing on her front step. She stammered something about David working late, that he was supposed to be home later. But the detective cut through that with the truth. He's not working late. He's on a date. I knew exactly how it would play out from there. As soon as the detective left, David's wife would be dialing his number, demanding answers, probably screaming at him. And when David saw her name pop up on his phone, I bet his stomach dropped. He'd scramble for an excuse, trying to smooth things over, but it wouldn't work. She'd be in full meltdown mode, and David would rush home, desperate to salvage whatever was left of his crumbling life. While all that chaos was brewing on David's end, I was back at home, sitting with a picture of Emily and David kissing in my hands. I stared at it, and that was it for me. Any feelings I had left for Emily evaporated in that moment. Love? Respect? All gone. That image was burned into my brain, and I knew there was no coming back from this. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. I wasn't just out to catch Emily cheating or to wreck David's perfect little life. I was out to dismantle everything. And while I sat there, waiting for Emily to come home, I was already putting the finishing touches on the next phase of my plan. You see, Emily thought she was clever, like she could pull all of this off without any fallout. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I'd spent years building my business, making the right connections, learning how to control situations and bend them in my favor. This was no different. To me, it was just another deal, a problem that needed solving. And by the time I was done, both she and David would regret every single choice that led them to that dinner. The moment of revenge was finally here, and I had been playing the long game, watching everything unfold exactly as I had predicted. Now it was time to pull the trigger. Remember that blonde girl I mentioned? The one with the perfect hair, legs for days, and a body that could make any guy lose his mind? Well, if you didn't catch on earlier, let me spell it out now. She wasn't just some random woman. No, she was the final piece in my plan, the tool I needed to bring everything to a head. You can probably guess what she does for a living, but I'll leave that part vague for obvious reasons. When Emily left for her date, the blonde was already waiting at my place. In person, she looked even better than the photos, dressed in this tight, sleek dress that left little to the imagination. We sat down, had a few glasses of wine, though honestly, I was the one who needed it more than she did. I was on edge, not because I was nervous, but because of the anticipation, the knowledge of what was coming. It's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife out of sheer revenge. But was it really cheating, though? I mean, she had already blown our marriage apart with David. This didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like payback. After a few more glasses, we headed upstairs. Now, let me be clear about something. There was nothing romantic about what happened next. No passion. No love. Hell, it wasn't even lust. It was just transactional. Something that needed to be done to complete what Emily had started. The blonde was good at her job, but my mind was somewhere else the entire time. I wasn't thinking about her, or even Emily, to be honest. It was like I was going through the motions, checking off a box. We had sex, but it was emotionless, mechanical. I wasn't in it for the pleasure. This was business. Lying there afterward, all I could think about was Emily's reaction when she walked through that door. The shock on her face when she found me in bed with another woman. That was the real prize I was waiting for. That was the only part of this entire thing that mattered. Right on schedule, I heard the front door open. The creak of the hinges, followed by the echo of her footsteps down the hallway. We didn't stop. I didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I wanted her to walk in on it. I wanted her to see everything. When Emily finally stepped into the bedroom, her scream was instant. She screamed like she had walked in on a murder scene. Maybe, in her eyes, she had. She froze there in the doorway, her face drained of color, her eyes wide, completely stunned by what she was seeing. It was like her entire world had just collapsed, and she couldn't make sense of it. The blonde didn't hang around. She dressed faster than I would have thought possible, like she'd rehearsed this exact moment before. Not a word, not a glance. She just slipped out of the room and out the front door, leaving Emily and me alone to deal with the fallout. Then Emily snapped. I'd seen her angry before, but this was a whole new level. It was like she'd lost complete control of herself. She screamed at me, accusing me of betrayal, of being the one responsible for ruining our marriage. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh. Here she was, yelling at me, as if she hadn't just been out with David, booking hotel rooms and playing the role of his mistress. I let her yell, watching her come undone. She paced back and forth, throwing her hands up, cursing me, calling me every name she could think of. I stood there, calm, waiting for her to burn through her anger. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo, the one of her and David kissing at the restaurant, the one she thought no one would ever see. I know about the hotel, I said, my voice cold, holding the phone up so she couldn't avoid the evidence. The one you booked for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending the night in with David. Her expression changed in an instant. The anger, the outrage, it all drained away, replaced by pure shock and maybe for the first time fear. She stammered, trying to explain, trying to make excuses, but I wasn't interested in hearing any of it. "You're staying there tonight," I said, my voice calm but firm. "That room's not going to waste." For a moment, she stood there speechless. I could almost see the gears turning in her head as she scrambled for a way out, trying to spin this into something where she came out the victim. But there was no way she could pull it off this time. She was caught, and she knew it. She tried, though. She screamed at me, her voice shaking. "How could you do this? After everything we've been through? You're the one cheating now? How do you even sleep at night?" I just shook my head in disbelief. "You really think I'm the bad guy here?" I asked, trying to keep the rage from spilling over. "You went out with another man, Emily. You rented a hotel room, and I'm pretty sure you weren't planning on discussing work in there. Don't stand there acting like you're innocent." She kept going, still trying to spin the story, trying to make it seem like what I had done was somehow worse than whatever she and David had been doing behind my back. But I wasn't falling for her games anymore. I stayed calm, keeping my voice steady, and laid it out for her. I reminded her that all of this, every bit of it, was her fault, from the way she'd withdrawn emotionally to her affair with David. Every step had led us right to this moment. Eventually, she gave up. She grabbed her purse, fumbled with her phone, and called a taxi. I didn't stop her. I watched as she packed up a few things, knowing full well she'd be heading to that hotel room she'd booked for David. Only this time, she'd be spending the night there alone. When the door slammed shut behind her, I expected to feel something, maybe satisfaction or relief. But there was nothing, just a cold, hollow space where our life together had once been. Sure, the revenge was satisfying in its own way, but it didn't fix anything. It didn't heal the wounds she'd left in our marriage. All it did was bring us to the inevitable end. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. I had more in store for Emily. The next part of my plan? That was already set in motion, and when it was done, she wouldn't just be humiliated, she'd be ruined. Filing for divorce was the final nail in the coffin. After everything, the lies, the cheating, the betrayal, there was no coming back. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses or seeing her tears. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had ended the moment she walked out with David. The rest? Just legal formalities. I wasted no time. I hired the best lawyers I could find. Sharks, the kind who didn't just win cases but obliterated the other side. No half measures, no cutting corners. I wanted her out of my life for good, and I wanted to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. This wasn't about fairness. This was about making her pay for everything she had done. And with the resources I had, I could make sure she did. The first thing I did was block her on every form of communication. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to read her texts, didn't want to see her name pop up on my phone. If she needed to reach me, she'd have to do it through the lawyers. There was nothing left to say. The second she left for that hotel, any last piece of concern I had for her disappeared. We were finished. Of course, the divorce process wasn't quick. These things never are, especially when there's a lot of money involved. And we had plenty of that to fight over. The house, the assets, the business, everything was on the table. At first, Emily tried to play hardball. She thought she deserved half of everything, thought she could walk away with a clean slate and a fat bank account. But she underestimated me. She didn't realize how far I was willing to go to make sure she got exactly what she deserved, and nothing more. We had court dates, depositions, endless meetings with the lawyers. And you know what? Not once did we exchange a single word. Every time I saw her in court, I didn't speak. I barely even looked at her. But I could tell she was cracking. She wasn't the woman I had married. This version of Emily was desperate, clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she had left, but she was losing her grip, and she knew it. My lawyers were relentless. They tore her apart in every negotiation, every hearing. They dug up every loophole in our prenup, every financial record that worked in my favor. And the photos of her and David? That was the final blow. Her infidelity was ironclad, undeniable. The court saw it for what it was, her fault, her actions, her destruction of our marriage. The process dragged on for months. At times, it felt like it would never end. But I was patient. Every day that passed, I knew we were getting closer to the end, and I knew I was winning. I could see it in her face, the way she carried herself. Defeated, humiliated. She went from fighting tooth and nail to barely showing up for the hearings. I think she knew there was no escape, no way out this time. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was over. The judge handed down the final ruling, and it was everything I had hoped for. I walked away with almost everything: the house, the business, the assets. Emily? She was left with next to nothing. A small settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She tried to argue for more, tried to claim she needed support, but the evidence was stacked against her. The court sided with me on every point. It was over, and I had won. I'll never forget the look on her face when the final ruling came down. A mix of disbelief, anger, and maybe regret? Who knows? Frankly, I didn't care. All that mattered was that I had won. I had taken almost everything from her, just like she had tried to take everything from me. And now, she was left with next to nothing. As we left the courtroom that day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. We were done. Completely, finally done. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and I haven't looked back since. But if I'm being honest, there wasn't any real satisfaction in it. Sure, I took almost everything. Sure, she's out of my life. But victory? It doesn't taste the way you think it will. What's left behind is just this empty aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it actually did. I won the battle. Yeah, but the war? That war was hell, and nobody comes out of something like that without scars. It's a strange thing to be on the other side of all that chaos. To look back at everything, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce, and realize that it's finally over. For the longest time, it felt like I'd never get here, like the mess Emily created would hang over me forever. But here I am, standing, living, moving forward. The first few months after the divorce were rough. I won't lie. I thought that once everything was settled, I'd feel relief. I thought that winning, taking everything from her, would somehow make me feel whole again. But nothing prepares you for the aftermath. You can't just switch off years of history, the emotional wreckage, the weight of it all. There's no magic reset button. You have to rebuild. And rebuilding? That takes time. I had to figure out who I was outside of that marriage, outside of the anger and revenge. For so long, everything had been about her. Catching her, exposing her, getting back at her. And once that was over, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into my work. I expanded the business, poured all my energy into it. And it paid off. The company's thriving better than ever. Financially, I'm in a great spot. Now, money doesn't fix everything, but let's be real. It makes rebuilding your life a lot easier. Therapy helped too. I wasn't keen on the idea at first. The thought of sitting in front of a stranger, spilling all my darkest thoughts? Not exactly my thing, but it worked. I learned how to let go of some of the anger, the bitterness. Carry that stuff around for too long, and it eats you alive. It's not like therapy was some quick fix, though. It was more like slowly chipping away at a wall until, bit by bit, you can finally see what's on the other side. I started taking care of myself physically and mentally. Got back into working out, eating right, making time for the things I enjoy. I rediscovered hobbies I'd forgotten about, things that had nothing to do with Emily or our past. And little by little, I built a life that was mine again. A life that wasn't tied to the wreckage of what we had. Relationships, though? That's a whole other story. I'm not looking for anything. I've come to realize that some things just aren't for me, and relationships might be one of those things. I don't trust love anymore, not the way I used to. After everything I went through, it's hard to imagine letting someone get that close again, giving anyone that kind of power over me. People always say not to let one bad experience define you. But this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my whole world, and it came crashing down. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay being on my own. Some people think you need someone else to complete you, to give your life meaning. I've learned that's just bullshit. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and purpose without needing someone by your side. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life has value. These days, my focus is on me, my work, my health, my future. I travel when I want. I spend time with friends. I live my life without any of the drama or nonsense weighing me down. It's simple, quiet, and exactly what I need. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love, done with relationships, done with putting my heart on the line for someone else. I've learned that sometimes the only person you can truly count on is yourself. And that's enough for me. So yeah, I'm doing better than I have in years. And if that means staying single, staying focused on myself, then so be it. I've earned this peace, and I'm not giving it up for anyone. Not anymore.